Good evening. I'm Pastor Mike Grogan. Welcome to the Congregational Church of Lincoln City, an open and affirming and a just peace congregation of the United Church of Christ. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, from wherever you might be joining us, you are welcome here this evening. As we come together, we acknowledge that we are gathered on land that is not ours, but is the land of ancient peoples, now represented by the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. We offer gratitude for this place, for those who have stewarded it, and for the opportunity to live in community on this sacred land. Tonight's gathering will be recorded, and so it will be posted to our church's YouTube channel, and I think Shar is going to post it to the Indivisible YouTube channel as well. I would invite you to silence your cell phones or pagers. And as I always say, if you have a pager, you should get a cell phone, because it's 2026. But welcome, I'm going to turn it over to Shar. Bathrooms are straight back that hallway, and that was my primary job.
Welcome, everyone. So I'm Shar Walbaum, and I represent Indivisible Lincoln City. I'm very happy that you're here. I'm honored that the 5 pastors that are joining us today are willing to talk about this very important topic, white Christian nationalism. How do we respond? I was very happy when I saw the way they had framed the title, because I do think that's the right question. We need to think about what it is that is being said, the kind of rhetoric that's being used, and how sacred texts are being really exploited and manipulated. And so I think we're going to hear about some of those things today. I hope that we do. Of course, they could do it, as far as I'm concerned, for another 3 hours, or maybe a series of 6 of these. What do you think? Sound good?
Let's ask that question when it's over.
Yeah, okay, but I know what the answer is going to be already. So I've been waiting for this for 50 years. My family, as some of you know, in the 70s, found charismatic Christianity, which was fine, and I knew about that and respected them for that, and that's how it's been. But then there was a thing that happened, a sort of shift that I could see happening and hear happening in what they said, that really sort of freaked me out. And so one of the reasons, the fundamental reasons it freaked me out, was it was not the Christianity that I understood, having been raised in actually a number of different churches, because the neighbors always felt they had to take us to church. So I went to a lot of different denominations. But I know some things about the Bible, and I know some things about Christianity, and that scares me still. So I think that you're going to find this very useful. I think it's an important evening. Before I sit down, I wanted to just mention 2 things. There's material out there and books out there that you might want to take a look at. Bob's Books has brought some books on this topic for you to look at. There's also materials out there you might want to read. I want to call your attention to a couple of things. There's flyers for Juneteenth celebration that's happening here in Lincoln City. You'll see those out there. Make sure you find out about that. It's happening on when? Juneteenth, which is when? Tomorrow. Which is what else? My anniversary. And what else? It's my mother's birthday. And you know what else? It's my birthday. It's like the best day in the whole world. And then I also want to make sure you notice that Pride in the Park is happening, this coming up. There's flyers for it out there as well, and buttons and things like that. So please make sure you take a look at those things. And other than that, I think it's time for me to let go of the mic. And I would like to introduce, who's speaking first?
I think Bill's going to introduce our speakers.
Okay, good. Okay,
Yeah.
Bill. Shh, come over here. So this man, Pastor Bill, I have a hard time. I want to call him by like his last name, but he says call him Pastor Bill. So this is Pastor Bill, and he's going to introduce people to you. Please.
Good evening.
Good
My name is
evening.
Pastor Bill, or as my kids know me, bruh. Currently privileged to pastor in our system, what's called a district, and I pastor 3 churches in an area out here. But Lincoln City concerns the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Northeast 22nd. So if you ever find yourself at Dairy Queen, just go up the hill, and you are welcome anytime. And I'd like to introduce all of our panel that we'll be having after. We'll probably just start this direction and end with our keynote speakers. Reverend Valerie Kendall, who's our lead pastor at Driftwood Fellowship, an American Baptist church. And also want to acknowledge sitting just behind her and a little to the side is Pastor John Kendall, recently retired, and they have co-pastored that church on 17th Street, right? Northwest 17th Street for a number of years. And you are welcome there any Sunday morning as well. Please find your way there if you need some great music. And Pastor Michael Grogan already introduced himself, and we thank you for hosting this event, opening your church, and being hospitable to everybody in this entire town. And I've been privileged to be here a few times and was welcomed here as a guest speaker at one point. And I appreciate the inclusion that you demonstrate and the heart that you have for all of God's people. And our 2 keynote speakers this evening, the Pastor Reginald Richardson, Junior, right? Pastor Reginald Richardson Jr. We pray for a third if God wills. And Reginald is a colleague of mine. He pastors Your Bible Speaks Seventh-day Adventist Community Church in Portland, Oregon, and involved and heavily invested in community restoration and care for all of their neighbors in an active and pragmatic way. And I'm privileged to call Reginald my colleague and also a great friend and mentor to me. And so he's shaking his head. We can talk about it later. And he gives me courage and reminds me not to resign. So, and also want to acknowledge Reginald's partner and wife, sitting a few rows back, works in education in Portland as well. As also sharing the platform this afternoon is my father, Pastor Tim Mayne, recently retired, most recently pastoring the Hawkinson Heights Seventh-day Adventist Church in somewhere in Washington. Nobody really knows where it is. Don't Google it. There's some troubling things you'll find. And also, with that, previously for about 13 years, the Tillamook Seventh-day Adventist Church, and currently just onboarding as a hospice chaplain in this county. And so, without further ado, I don't know which one of you agreed to go first. All right, it looks like you've been nominated. So Reginald, the time's yours.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This is electric for a guy who grew up in the city of Chicago, to be on the Oregon coast, a place that my conference regularly has meetings, but I always complain and gripe because there's one thing about me, I'm afraid of tsunamis. And so I am here in great risk and fear and anxiety. But I believe that there is a God that cares. And that's the reason I think why we're all really here, to actually understand whether or not the God that I'm talking about and the God that we see Fox News, MSNBC talk about, whether or not those 2 things are compatible. A God that cares for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. But I would be remiss before I kind of go into some of the things I want to address if I did not acknowledge the fact that tomorrow we celebrate the liberation of slaves, enslaved people. Keyword, people. We all stand in a country that benefited off of the free labor of the African slave trade. And today America is what it is because of the free labor of my ancestors and tomorrow, and as we go through this season of patriotism, it is important for us to remember the cost. Every resistance march joins the line of a patriotic perspective. Being critical of America is the best thing you can do because it is truly an effort of love. And I say my relationship with America is this. It's very similar to Jay-Z and Beyonce's. There's a lot of issues, even some abuse. But I realize that my life is better here. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that it's better for me and my children. So for those who may be skeptical, who are on the more conservative bend, this conversation is as much as it for you as it is for those who are trying to understand what is happening with white Christian nationalism or Christian nationalism. I also acknowledge my privilege as a black man who has a subset of privilege and has participated in the culture of putting those individuals who communities may see as other to the side. And so I have to acknowledge those things before I can dive in, because it's easy for you to punch down, but when you've also acknowledged that you are doing the punching, you have to be able to do that. And so today my goal is not to punch down, but to punch across and to address some serious issues. I take this perspective of, in America, Christian nationalism is a false theology. So I want to make that very clear. It's a false theology. It is an ideology that is rooted in getting the outcome, but not maintaining the center pillar. It is Christian as much as I am a Chicago Bull. It is Christian as much as I am a Chicago Bear. My wife knows that I have 2 Chicago Bears jerseys, one with my name on it and one with the name of Caleb Williams. When I put it on, I do not become Caleb Williams. When I put it on, it may have my name, but it does not mean I'm a multimillionaire living in the city of Chicago or Hammond, Indiana. I frame it that way so that we can come at this conversation with a little bit of joy, but a hard look. Christian nationalism primarily focuses around the benefits and the outcomes and not the relationship. A relationship, as my colleague will very soon kind of unpack the theology of it, I'm talking about a cursory view of Christianity. That if those who pray will see blessings. That is the Christianity that Christian nationalists are looking at. The how can I squeeze my agenda out of Jesus? I want Jesus as Savior and Lord over the pagan, the other, not over me. That is how we have a unpacking and a weird parallel along the lines of our dear beloved Billy Graham, America's pastor. One of the things that is really important to remember about Christian nationalism, it is not a new phenomenon. It is an ancient phenomenon. The prophet Jonah was a nationalist. You're probably saying, what do you mean? Nationalism is a perspective that nation above all else and superior. When you blend the two, Christian and nationalism, you are leveraging, of course it's my administrative assistant that is the one thing that allows to ping past the notifications. And so what is, important for me to bring to, as I kind of start to frame this, Christian nationalism is a focusing on nations' power structures, influence, and authority, and using God as simply a garnish to get political power. One of Billy Graham's biggest regrets at the end of his ministry was that he nuzzied up too close to the political establishment. That continues on now, we see through his son Franklin and the rest of the infrastructure surrounding him. With that understanding, Christian nationalism is an alteration and a misnomer of the biblical story and life and teachings of the Messianic King Jesus. We see this played out in the countless stories of the biblical text where people are inviting Jesus to take divine authority and to take earthly authority. He does this when he is confronted through the conversation of around how will your kingdom come and what will it look like. Jesus does not take part in a rebellion, an insurrection, a warlike stance. He takes a surrender stance. And so Christianity is not one of power, a religion of power, but a religion of submission. Submitting does not mean losing. Jesus and John Wayne, an amazing book, I think it's on our reading list, is a book that talks about what happened to Jesus to get us to the point of Christian nationalism today. One of the most important parts that I find is that we have turned Jesus into a caricature to our own personal agendas. Now, this is the hard critique for all of us today. Whether we are conservative or progressive, if we use Jesus, Christianity, for any other purpose than to show the love of God and to advance his kingdom, his kingdom, his kingdom, his kingdom, we are no different than the group that abuses Jesus for their political agenda.
Amen.
And that is a hard critique. If I use Jesus to move Democratic Party agenda items, I am no different than someone in the Republican Party using Jesus to harm LGBTQIA+ brothers and sisters. It's no different. Jesus must not be used as a cudgel, but he must be used as the essence of what drives us into care and compassion. There are three elements or three ways we respond as individuals, whether we are people of faith, people of skeptical nature of faith, or people of no faith at all. There are three. The way we respond to Christian nationalism, one, is this: love the Christian nationalist the same way we love someone who we have an intimate relationship with. Meaning, I must love my MAGA neighbor the same way I love the trans kid that I minister to. Because regardless, they are people who are looking to get whole. And that's how that's how I choose to reframe everything. That I have to be able to say, we are all people trying to go home. What that home looks like, denominationally, not worried about it. We're trying to go somewhere. We're trying to be something. And loving someone, despite the differences of perspective and theology and worldview, just loving them, their well-being, their efforts of things that are good and kind and just, and even loving them before they're able to even offer that love back, shows a perspective and grows your capacity to care for others. So we love regardless of worldview and perspective. The second thing that we do is that we hold each other accountable. How we respond to Christian nationalism We cannot respond to Christian nationalism while we are practicing those same fruits in our communities. In Lincoln City, the Democratic Party, which I have the privilege of serving as a delegate to the DNC in 2024 and served on the Rules Committee as SEC delegate, one of the things that broke my heart the most about participating in our Democratic Party events, Bill, was this. I saw the same spirit of control, harm, hurt, and abuse that people claim for church hurt at the Democratic Party SEC meeting here in Lincoln City. People who claim to no longer believe in faith or participate in faith were struggling and doing the exact same behaviors that drove them out of community. So holding each other accountable as a response to Christian nationalism is a method to move forward, which means, hey, Bill, I know you're stressed, but how's that love coming? How is the care for your neighbor coming? How are you loving the student, the young person, the senior adult? How are you looking for justice? One of the biggest issues that I have, and I'm going to wrap it up in a second, as I've kind of painted this initial picture around Christian nationalism. What we see on television being described as Christianity is oftentimes a caricature and not the real thing. Christianity takes on wide breadths and deep depths, as we are seeing in this room. If I were to ask a theological question, there would probably be, as our faces differ, our answers will differ. About the nature of sin and all the different things. But what we all can agree on is that there is a Christ, and that Christ is the center of the Christian faith. We start at that point of agreement. The difference and the challenge with Christian nationalism is it's using Christ not to bring his kingdom come, but to bring the kingdom of America. That is why we see a large impetus around Judeo-Christian events. That's why we see a large push in the territory of Israel and Palestine. The interest of that issue, the interest around abortion, the issue around LGBTQIA+, it is because in the eyes of Christian nationalists, those who identify as Christian nationalists, they see it as an opportunity to bring the blessings of God forward by any means necessary, by leveraging Christian identity, Christian practice, to bring forth a kingdom of American excellence and not one of justice, mercy, and peace. It is a tale of two kingdoms and a tale of two agendas. And so, because Christian nationalism is sitting at the cornerstone of our culture and context today, our third and final effort that should be this. If you are a person of Christian faith or non-faith, do not allow one group to own the gospel, to own religion. And so today, through the panel, through my colleagues' remarks shortly, for those who may not practice a worldview of faith that is Christian, this is what is important. We are not all the same. As our faces differ, so do our views and our perspectives. It is usually the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And when you are living a life of peace, you don't usually have much to speak about. Unless there is a stone in the way and gets in the works, right? The stone would be a pastor in my denomination not being looked out for. It requires me to get loud and greasy and get squeaky. And hopefully there will be some grease. That looks like you in your neighborhood, that when you see a flag that you don't agree with being put up by government, agency, or institution, because of movements kind of like what's happening in Battleground. And Battleground, Washington, if you're unfamiliar, is having a resurgence of Christian nationalist MAGA agenda starting to rise up, or start is an interesting term, but continue to go forward. Being willing to advocate and call out for justice is a part of that last and important step. So when Reagan, and we have from as early as the Bible with Jonah, as early in America's history with our founding fathers, quote unquote, Reagan to Barack Obama to Donald Trump, Christian nationalism has been playing the long game. Political forces have been playing the long game in order to take power. And because of Christians' or simplicity of wanting to do good for good reasons, it was an easy mark that we see that has come forward in the times of, around the time of Reagan and the moral majority and wanting to push towards less government, but with more government control. And so, as I get ready to let my colleague continue on the conversation, one of the elements of the story that must not be forgotten is that Christian nationalism, in its current context where we're seeing it start to turn into political violence and start to divide families, and in its current manifestation, is a greater part of a story that is relatively new. This is a new addendum to the story. And so, because it is new, it is not the mainline worldview and perspective, because it is not the end-all be-all of the Christian denomination and faith, we have to be very skeptical. It is new in its prominence in this country in the way that it's being presented today. It is becoming acceptable to be Christian nationalists. We see Marjorie Taylor Greene and countless leaders. They've accepted it as a normal part of their identity. But today, we get to participate in pushing back. Because there is a relationship that has not historically been followed in this country, where one side can push, but there's also supposed to be that symmetrical push the other way that keeps things centered. And so I believe, as a part of my Christian faith, that my freedoms in this country, my ability to practice my faith, demands me to protect your ability to practice your faith or choose not to participate in faith at all. These are things that are placed in equilibrium. And opening up is usually the hardest part because you're trying to frame what you're trying to frame, but also we'll talk some more, and I'm going to let my colleague come and talk a little more about the theology. I hope if you have any questions about what I remarked, feel free to ask there. It's 15 minutes is hard to break down Christian nationalism relatively quickly.
Reggie that I'm not really sure why I'm up here after him. I feel like if you just let him go on for another hour or two, and it'd probably be pretty good. I would like to start out by saying something that is not very obvious. I am a white male. And I'm a Christian.
No.
And I'm an American. And I'm a fan of the Chicago Bears, I'm sorry. I'm from Michigan.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm a fan of the Chicago Bears is because my dad is from Wisconsin, and he was some kind of cheesehead person. So, to get him mad when I was younger, I became a Chicago Bears fan. Just to make sure that they took on the Green Bay Packers. I became a pastor 42 years ago. I was just recently removed from my church in Tillamook because of a MAGA hat. I taught a little Bible class in a Christian school run by the church. The day after the election, I, to be honest with you, wish I had not gone to my Bible class. I had been gone the week before for a fire chaplain convention. I've been part of the Neatard Oceanside Fire Department for the last 13 years. I joined the fire department in Colorado when I pastored there because the undertaker came to me and said, hey, you pastors don't do anything all week long, you ought to volunteer. So I found out I liked it. I found out that it was the opposite of spending time shooting your mouth off. You actually did something. I just recently retired from Netards Oceanside as a captain, but I remain a fire chaplain for Tillamook County. I say all of this only because to get at something that Pastor Reggie said was very important. You look at all of our faces and we all come with a history and a background. My mother died when I was a 4-year-old kid, but she had baptized me as a United Methodist. So I actually tell everybody it was not United Methodist, it was not Free Methodist, I was a Wesley Methodist, a real Methodist. My dad married a Seventh-day Adventist, and I became a Seventh-day Adventist. My stepmother was one of the most wicked women I've ever met. I did her funeral, and my funeral address was, how sad to die when no one cares. And her son, my half-brother, told me, if you look at me, because I made him go to his mother's funeral. He said, if you look at me, I will whistle, ding dong, the witch is dead. I looked at my brother, he did it, and I laughed from the pulpit. That's pretty sad. My grandmother was concerned about this Seventh-day Adventist stuff, so she picked me up every Sunday morning and hauled me off to the Salvation Army Church. So I tell people that my background is a theology within the Adventists, a knowledge that my mother wanted a path for me, and a faithful grandmother who said that Christianity needs to have a practical stance. Amen. That if your Christianity does not involve taking care of people, then she didn't know what good it was. And so I come with that particular background. I got involved with Indivisible and speaking because after 42 years, I stayed out of the public realm. I spoke in churches, but I never really did much out in the open until the death of Renee Good and Axe Pretty. And in Tillamook, they were looking for somebody to speak, and I said I would do that. And in the course of those 2 vigils that I took part of, I can't remember how the conversation went, but somebody said to me some comment about Christian nationalism. And I said, well, the problem is I think you don't really understand what's behind it. The theology that's behind a Pete Hegstaff, a Mike Huckabee, some of these other people that are out there pushing this particular agenda. Russell Voigt is probably the scariest person in America today. Yep. Because he is the author and the push behind Project 2025, which our current president said he had no part of, but he used it. I actually believe that what happened to most evangelical Christianity is they became a useful tool. Yes. But I have come since to believe that both sides were playing, as Pastor Reggie said, the long game. I did a bunch of reading. Pastor Mike shared a couple books with me. I have read way too many books on white Christian nationalism. My head is swimming. I'm on the board at the Tillamook Library. I joined it because I believe in libraries. I believe in education. I believe we must constantly read. Yes. Somebody asked me, what do you do with YouTube? What do you do with all of everybody's opinion? And I said, well, stop for a minute. Quit going there. Go to a library and pick up a book that took time to read. Right. We spend too much time in just small little blurbs, and we need to have a broader base. But at the library today, I picked up one more book and quickly read it because I thought, well, I had to have some more stuff. But I wanted to go back because part of my particular job, my 15 minutes, was to try to give a little bit of a theological basis behind this. Now again, I grew up within a particular denomination that was, at the beginning of my career, 42 years ago, was extremely vocal, and at the beginning of our existence, in the separation of church and state. I am a Christian who goes to church on Saturday morning. My Sabbath starts on Friday night and goes through Saturday night like our Jewish brothers. I wanted to have the freedom. Our church wanted to have the freedom to do that. Now, I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Very heavy Christian reform. I didn't know that I was growing up in a state, in a city with blue laws. Does anybody know what blue laws are? What you can and cannot do on Sunday. Well, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, nothing was open on Sunday. And I was an Adventist, which meant nothing was open for me on Saturday. But I grew up knowing that before the sun hit on Friday night, you needed to get all your shopping done because you can't have nothing until Monday morning. I never thought much about it. It just was the way of life. But the longer I existed and the more I grew, I began to realize we need the freedom for everybody to do and to believe and to act as they will. This is America. We're supposed to be all about freedom for each other. And one of the things that came out in my reading is the most difficult thing for most of us, including myself, and that is compromise. I give up a little, you give up a little, I gain some, you gain some, and we live in a beautiful society. Now I'm going to go back just a little bit more with my development. I dropped out of high school. It's 1975. I grew my hair, because I had it back then. And I bought a motorcycle. And I worked in a factory making bread. And then I cut steel for a while. I worked for an old German metallurgist. And every day he'd say the same thing: cut that stupid hair, sell that stupid motorcycle, and go make something of yourself. I still to this day don't know why I listened to him. One day I put the motorcycle up for sale, price no one should have looked at. Somebody came by, did not even argue, paid cash, hauled off with my bike. I went to the barber that afternoon, cut my hair off. Went to work the next day, and Dr. Knapp, an old German who never laughed, he could not quit laughing all day long. I went off to school to become a veterinarian. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to be. After 1 year, the sale of that motorcycle, the money ran out. I was going to go home, cut steel, no big deal. Somebody said to me, hey, you know, they hire people to go teach English in other countries. You ought to try that. Well, my aunt and uncle just adopted a little Korean boy. So I thought, hey, I'll go to Korea. I met in Korea, for the very first time in my life, I think, what it meant to see Christianity really in action, to truly be loving. Now again, the situation was, and I just apologized to an old friend of mine because I did not know, I was placed in the city of Gwangju 1 month after the insurrection there, where 900 to 1,000 students were killed in the streets. I taught English to the people who went through that, and I did not know the depth of what that meant. To stand up for your rights. Chun Doo-hwan had become a dictator, and he was crushing the insurrection that took place there, the revolt that took place. I taught in a school with bullet holes in it. We had riot police in the street every night, but I learned very quickly they would not touch an American. So I did whatever I wanted. But what I saw in the depth of the love of the Korean director in the school that I taught in was just incredible. I eventually adopted my son Bill, his brother's back there. They have an adopted sister from Korea. One Saturday night somebody came by and said, hey, would you like a girl? I said no, my wife said yes, we have 3 boys. It was probably one of the best decisions we made. But it began to teach me what it means to be different than white in America. And my daughter, as a woman of color, has helped me a lot to say, Dad, you don't realize the words that come out of your mouth are sometimes very harmful. And I have to check myself quite often, and sometimes she's wrong, not always right. But my daughter has taught me a lot. But my old pastor friend who loved me into Christianity, my daughter went back to find her roots, to learn the language. She was lost most of the time. She said she doesn't belong in America, she doesn't belong in Korea anymore. She was lost once, she was pretty upset. We were afraid for her mental state. And after 40 years, I called my friend, Pastor Chun, and said, could you help me? I have a picture of him with my daughter. He picked her up, took her home, and took care of her. And I just say all of that stuff because I believe strongly that the theological basis behind Christianity is one simple word, and that is love. That the problem that the Christian has, and has always had, is there's only one weapon that you can fight with. Everybody else gets everything. But you get one thing. Is that you have to learn to love. And I appreciated extremely, very much what you had to say. That we have to love our MAGA neighbor as well as we do our LGBT friends, whatever. It wasn't that long ago where my neighbor, who flies multiple flags, and I wanted to fly a couple flags. I'm going to tell you that sometimes I don't like love. Sometimes I get tired of it. And I told my wife I'm going to tack some flags on the back of our house because I'm tired of the neighbor. She wouldn't let me. I said, well, then I'm going to paint the old satellite dish. And I did. And the only thing my wife, who's here today, would let me do it, it's a yellow, I painted it yellow with a big old smiley face. It's the only thing she would allow me to put her face in there. But I had my neighbor come over to me, and I was mowing the lawn, and he said, Tim, they've shot Charlie Kirk. And he began to weep. And I said, who's Charlie Kirk? I didn't know. I don't really pay that much attention to that stuff. And he was horrified that I did not know. I said, oh, I think I've heard his name, but I don't really know much about him. But my neighbor and I still talk together. We still greet each other. Because I told him I was sorry that he lost somebody that meant somebody to him. Even though, and I've since had to learn quite a bit. But I'm interested in the fact that, because I was thinking about the theology of this, that Reggie brought up Jonah. Because we can argue whether it was a whale, whether it was a fish, whether it happened, whether it's myth, whether you can spend 3 days at the bottom of the sea, all of that good stuff about Jonah chapter 1 and 2. But whether it ever happened or not, somehow he got spit out, he's on the land, he goes and does what God says, and that is to warn Nineveh that a big problem is coming. Nineveh changes, they listen, because they don't like the future. And then we see Jonah for the first time. He sits down and he complains to God, and he says one of the most incredible statements in all of the scripture, I knew you were a God of mercy and you're going to let these bozos off the hook. And he was mad because he knew who God was. Mercy. That there are times when we take paths that are going to get us in trouble. And I believe that America took that path. I think it's always been there. I appreciate it very much. This is not a new movement. It's just one that has found its feet and its place. Right after I cut my hair, just before I went to college, I moved in with my old band teacher from my grade school days. He taught me trumpet. I still play 6th grade trumpet, just so you know. I never advanced much beyond that. But Mr. Lamb was a 500-pound gay man. I didn't know he was gay. He sat me down one day and said, Tim, I'm going to let you know I'm gay, but I ain't interested in you. Okay, it's good. But every Sunday morning he'd watch Jerry Falwell. He was a Catholic, but he loved Jerry Falwell. And he would send money to get a brick on Liberty Baptist, university or college or whatever it was. And I would sit there, and he'd usually kick me out of the room because I kept saying, this is nonsense, Mr. Lamb. And we would argue whether this was Christianity or whether it wasn't. This is not something new. But what it comes back to is this concept that says that Christianity has the right to develop a kingdom of power here on this earth. And that it doesn't matter that it's about power, it's about fear, and ultimately violence can be used to obtain objectives. I was brought up with this thing that the end does not justify the means. I would get my hind end whipped for that kind of stuff. But what we have done is we have looked at the Bible and we have picked out particular parts of it. God will bless you. God will prosper you. But our problem is we have ignored this God of mercy and justice and said, we want the God that says we can be rich. And I believe one of the problems of America today is that we all know if we just are good enough or prayed enough, we could win the lottery too. And we know we would use it for good. I would only buy one supercar, that's it. Which I will let you know, I just bought a Geo Metro. Because I needed a car for gas mileage. But it is the most pleasurable thing I've ever had. Because it demands absolutely nothing from me. And the son in between Pastor Bill and my Vancouver firefighter son in the back happens to be an Oregon State Trooper who lives in Tillamook and wants to give me a ticket really, really bad. But with my Metro, he can't. Because I can't get up to speed very fast. But the scriptures tell us theologically that the issue that we face with is the challenge of kingdom. Jesus made it very plain, my kingdom is not of this world. That what he was after was a transformation of hearts and minds. That we would become people who would be focused on loving another. And I thought about it as I was coming down today because I sometimes don't like the phrase that we use, the least of these, my brother. Because we often walk through this world and say, well, you're a whole lot less than I am. And so we determine who the least are. And I made a mistake just recently. Because I picked it up from one of the books that I read. And the book was called Generous Justice by Timothy Keller. Excellent book. But I disagree with one particular passage because it set me on a wrong course. He said that when Jesus was here, he was concentrated on 4 groups. And I have preached this for many years. That if we would care about the people that Jesus cared about, it would transform us. He cared about widows, orphans, the poor, and the foreigner. Constantly. And all of the Old Testament before Christ is full of that. God was deeply concerned with those 4 groups, and Timothy Keller brings this out. But then he says we need to expand that for our time. So we have immigrants and refugees. And then he makes reference to the new leper, the LGBT. I believe that was a mistake that I repeated. I will be doing a wedding in 2 weeks for a friend of mine. First time I am retired now. Nobody can tell me what to do anymore. But my friend asked me if I would do her wedding. And I said yes. And then we spent a long time trying to get her to a place where she could be proud of who she is and stop apologizing because her family is not going to be there for her. Her daughter is not going to be there for her. But just recently I called to solidify what we were doing in times and all of this, and I'd come across one other thing that I said, Sonia, you do not need the church's position to love God. Or permission, I should say, to love God. That she's wanted the church to approve. I said, you don't need that. God accepts you for who you are. So the theological basis behind some of this is a misunderstanding, and I need to get in this quick because I knew I was going to get carried away with too many other things, because that's what I have done for 42 years. And I appreciated what you said because I can, all by myself, go for 3 hours. And then wonder why you guys are not, with me in it. But the concept behind it and what I have come up with or been raised on and for 42 years have preached is a concept of world government. We start out with Babylon. Some of you may have heard of Daniel and the lion's den, his 3 worthies and this whole thing. It is a historical fact that Nebuchadnezzar did destroy Jerusalem. Took some of the prime people over to re-educate them. Teach them the ways of the Babylonians because they knew that they could reinstall regents in the area who now understood what the big guys wanted. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and in that dream he sees a progression of nations from Babylon all the way down to our time. And I always tell people it is not about who's got the power today. What God was trying to show Nebuchadnezzar is that there is no human system that's perfect. Not ours, not being an American. I will sit here. But what has happened is that the Christian nationalists have taken these concepts of world kingdoms, of human kingdoms, and said, we can do this if we just make everyone a Christian and follow these particular rules. But I like to remind people, there's as many Christian theological beliefs as there are people who believe them. Now, I tell people all the time, if you want to know what's right, come and I'll tell you. But it's right for me. And you're still going to have to come to Scripture to decide, what do you do with this? The book of Revelation is where we're at with Pete Hegsteff and Mike Huckabee. It is a belief that Israel has to be reestablished, that the Temple Mount has to be taken back. The problem is there's no theological basis for that.
That's right.
And I heard it mentioned earlier. We have come to the place where you cannot criticize Israel or you're called an anti-Semite. You cannot criticize the current administration or you're called anti-American. We've got to reclaim those particular places. I believe Israel won the battle. Let them be there. I believe that their borders were defined. But I believe strongly that the Palestinians have every right to their land. That they were there all along. And so the problem that we have is we do live within human thinking. And so we are confronted by that. But what we are looking at in terms of Christian nationalism, I believe very strongly that it is neither Christian, nor is it truly nationalistic. Now, one of the books said, let's not fight and go after a Christian nationalism. Let's go after, or a Christian nationalist, let's go after Christian nationalism. Because many people are confused. They don't read their Bible much. They listen to preachers who tell them, send me $10 and God will bless you with 100. And when he doesn't next week, you send me another because apparently you didn't have enough faith. And so our problem is that we are part of a country that wants prosperity. And we all have been part of it. We traced, my son did some work when he was working on his master's, traced our family back to the coal mines in England. When not coal mine, copper mines, I think it was, or tin mines, can't remember what they were mining over there, but the mines played out and they took a ship over from Liverpool over here, about 5 generations back. Entered the mines here. I loved what my son said. He said, Mayne's, our family, seems to be about 30 years behind the economic boom. We are always chasing something. My family eventually ended up in Wisconsin as dairy farmers, which I think it's appropriate that I'm ending up in Tillamook. Good place to go. And I will tell you, I do love Tillamook cheese. When I go back home, their Colby is better, but the cheddar is better out here. So I will go with that. But I do believe that one of the things that I would encourage is every once in a while, whether you have a faith, as Reggie said, Christian, non-Christian, whether you left it, take some time once in a while to pick up a Christian writer. I do recommend Timothy Keller.
Yes.
I do recommend C.S. Lewis. I do recommend, well, I was going to say another guy, but he just kind of ate it, so, which is a good reminder for all of us. Every single one of us humans have failures. Look too deep at all of our paths, and you'll see inconsistencies that would throw us out. But there is a desire. And Christianity offers to me, I've asked myself many times, as a white male in America, as a Christian, I take all of the bad stuff, because we are the cause of most of what's going on. Do I throw it all away? Or do I take these things and say, no, we can reclaim them? We can come back to this place of equality between male and female. We can come back to this place that says love is what defines what I believe. That all people are created equal. And that if I treat each other, every single person, like Christ did, he touched those who no one else would touch. He offered hope to those who had no hope. There are other ways to do it. There are other faith systems, there are other belief systems that are based on love. My brother is a atheist union negotiator. He reminds me all the time that we don't have a hold on goodness just because we're Christians. And I agree with him. We support people everywhere who care about people. Because the passage through this life is not that easy. In the book of Revelation, it tells us that there's going to come a time when God's principles will take over. And his principle is one thing. If you learn love, if you care for someone like you care for yourself, then we will transform how we live in this world. I do hope that as we talk a little bit, that you have some questions. I keep on saying that I'm the least qualified to sit up here. My son is young. My friend Reggie is younger. I want to let him know, I reminded him when I saw him in the hospital, we were taking chaplain's courses, that he's younger than all of my children, which makes me really old. But I am proud to serve and to talk and to share. And as my son said, to be mentored by the experience of Reggie. I've appreciated getting to know Mike, to listen to the kind of congregation he leads here. I have fallen in love with Val and her spirit, and I am proud to be part of what we are trying to accomplish here by just getting some conversation going. Because I believe strongly that Christians still have something good to say, but it's just not a voice being heard much. Thank you. Come up here.
And for everybody on that, excuse me, for everybody on the panel to find a seat, I think that this one's been spoken for already. And for everyone in the audience, we're going to have a little bit of conversation, and Val, I'm actually going to hand you the mic first. I'd like you to have a couple minutes to introduce yourself and share some of where you're coming from. We discussed this the other week, and so I trust that you've prepared a few thoughts. But as you've sat here, if you have any question at all, anything personal, anything ministry related, kind of what the subjects we talk about, how they impact our daily life, our families, our kind of our personal political stances. Each one of us here is glad to answer those as they come. If you have other questions, what do you practically do? How do you talk to a Christian neighbor? Say you see somebody who drives down the road with a giant flag with a cross on the back of it and say, why are we in the Crusades again? What do I do with this 18-year-old grandkid who spends all his time online and now posts Christ is King all day? How do I talk to this kid? Most of us have been teenagers at one point in our past. Some more recently than others. We start to forget what it was like to feel so anxious to have a place and to have a purpose. And so if you want to know, how do you talk to a Christian? If you have not been inside a church for a long time, if this is the first time in a long time you've been inside a church, say, what do you guys do in there? Where is this coming from? Raise a hand, shout it out. And most of us are paid on some form of a salary, and most of us get paid to talk. So there may also be a time when somebody needs to cut us off. So, Char, I'll leave it up to you. So, Val, I'm assuming that mic is on when you're properly hydrated, because hydration is a way of life. I invite you to grab the mic and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you here today. I am Pastor Valerie. I was ordained a mere 6 or 7 years ago, but have co-pastored with my husband John for 18 years in a small little yellow church, a block down from, used to be Maxwell's. It's Zeller's now. Anyway, we're very close to the highway. I think it's really important for us to be transparent as pastors. So I will hold nothing back. I had my head in the sand for a long time about Christian nationalism. My head was in biblical studies, preparing for my sermons, and my husband has always stayed very current with whatever was happening in our country, and sometimes I would hear it, it would feel annoying as I was reading scripture, and I would say, John, some other time. And then Pastor Bill invited me to be on this panel, and I thought, well, Valerie, you need to do some serious cramming. And so I jumped into the world of my husband's, who's been at this for years, and my eyes were opened. Pastor Tim had said to me, Val, I would really like to hear how this affects you as a woman, this topic of Christian nationalism, because I think these two guys really did a good job of showing the antithetical relationship between Christianity and nationalism. There is no overlap. There is no overlap. And I belong to an American Baptist denomination, which was, by the way, the first denomination on American soil that welcomed people of all faiths in Providence, Rhode Island. Our forefather, the very Roger Williams, who landed in the Massachusetts colony, was booted out in 1636 because he could not abide the church state of the colony of Plymouth in Massachusetts. So he was thrown out midwinter. The indigenous peoples took him in, of which he was gifted. He put their language down in a dictionary. Providence he named because it was a place where he was spared. And he opened up Providence, Rhode Island, to the Mennonites, to the Jews, to the Quakers, to, oh my goodness, whoever wanted to worship in a place where they were free to experience their own soul freedom. This is a tenet of the Baptist Church. Soul freedom. God is not coercive. He has never been coercive. Our lobbing over into a national state of coercion and calling it theology from the Baptist perspective is like, what happened here? We are a denomination built on the separation of church and state. Let me add that the American Baptists were abolitionists 100 years before the Civil War. Abolitionists. And then when it came time to sign the Declaration of Independence, the two colonies of Pennsylvania and Rhode Island would not sign the Declaration of Independence until there was a freedom of religion clause. So the roots of the Baptist faith is the heart and the soul of religious liberty. So what is happening in the Southern Baptist Convention right now? Let me just back up and say that we were the Northern Baptist Convention named that early, as opposed to the Southern Baptist Convention, who maintained that slavery was okay and Bible sanctified. They finally renounced that, I believe, in 1964.
Oh, where'd they find the courage?
So John and I were drawn to the religious liberty aspect of becoming American Baptists, aptly named. Now, where religious freedom is going under an authoritarian rule is terrifying. Pastor Tim asked what's happening in terms of you being a woman, and so I did some hard looking and some hard listening and some hard reading. And what I discovered is if we are in fact headed toward a theocracy, which is what Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho says we are, that's their goal, is a theocracy. Has anybody here read or seen The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood? Yeah, that's where we're going. Let me tell you how this pans out for women. Let me tell you where this goes. And let me also quote Doug Wilson. Did I call him Williams? No. Okay, Pastor Douglas Wilson. I heard him quoted today that toxic femininity is godly women rebelling against the way God made the world. Godly women were made to understand and appreciate and submit to the headship of their husband, authoritarian rule. And it's not complementarianism, it is full-on patriarchy. And he quoted, he said, "Godly women are designed to make the sandwiches." I'm quoting. He says, "Women are the kind of people that people come out of." Great, he knows his biology. He obviously does not know his Bible. So lifting and misappropriating scripture is a hallmark of what they're preaching. When you lift and twist and misappropriate, you change the face of God. Particularly for women who have since early Mesopotamia, been basically property. If we go clear up until the Greco-Roman civilization in which Christ was born into, in fact, let's go 400 years before. Let's go to Aristotle, who said women are monstrous deformations of men. Do you know why? Because we evidently don't have enough body heat to expel our genitalia.
That's why.
That's why. They're so cold at night. So we are monstrous, deformed men in the Greco-Roman world. And this was the world that Christ was born into. This was the world that he tried to help people understand. God loves everybody. In his world, in his kingdom, there is no male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. It is an egalitarian world. And if you want to take it back to the beginning, the Doug Wilsons would say, man was created as head over the woman and she is to obey. But the most important, those of you that know your Genesis scripture, can I just give you one teeny tiny little hack? I hope you never forget this. That was after sin entered the world. That was not right at creation. when God created man and woman, he said, this is very good. Then after with the whole garden kerfuffle with the apple, you know that story. That's when power became God. And God was not power anymore. Power among ourselves became our God. And that's when patriarchy happened originally. But again, never changed all through the Greco-Roman world. Jesus came, Paul came, he was not a misogynist. He tried very hard. There are 7 women in Romans 18 that have church responsibilities. One was a woman. She is called Junia. You'd be interested to know that the English translations made her name the male version because it was not okay for a woman to be seen as a teacher or an apostle. And especially Priscilla and Aquila, she's named first. Anyway, women in ministry, well, I think we might become completely obsolete if this is allowed to happen in our country. Anytime you have an authoritarian mode of government, and let me mention Kristen DeMay, who wrote Jesus and John Wayne. Her outside field of study was 20th century Germany and authoritarianism. Anytime you have an authoritarian system of power, it only gets that way through subjugating the levels of social strata beneath it. It only gets that way by rising up on the backs, shoulders of other social strata beneath. Women have always been somewhere on the bottom. If we go back to this, we have women once again losing our voting rights. Their hope is to appeal the 19th Amendment. Our black sisters only received the right to vote completely in 1964. Imagine turning the clock back that far. So women would lose their agency. Disobedience has to be punished. And then we are back to situations of abuse, both psychologically, sexually, socially. The far-reaching results of going to a patriarchy to that level is devastating. And did you know that half of the women are leaving churches? The number of women right now exiting en masse churches is phenomenal. We can't do that because that just leaves the guys. We've got to stay in there. I'm going to end now. Kristen DeMay was asked, what do we do now? And she said, what we have to do is to preach truth and be prepared to lose everything. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'll preach truth on behalf. I was raised by a German authoritarian father, and I am a sex abuse survivor. I wouldn't want that for my daughters. And I would love to create a safe place where women can discuss these things. But this world, I have a granddaughter that's 2, and I look at her and I go, we have got to work very hard. But as we do it like the Apostle Paul said, with gentleness and respect. I know it's hard. But we were created on an egalitarian platform. We really were. And if you feel like complementarianism, like God created you to be subjective, well, I clean the bathroom in our house. John cooks. I wash the dishes. It's great. It works this way for us. We haven't figured out. We haven't nailed down. But when it comes to power in our family, we are co-equals. And that works for us. And we feel that that is the way God designed man and woman to work together. I give and he gives. Anyway, who would you like this to go with? I think I said enough. Mike.
I just would like to, if we can switch gears, hear from all of you. And I think part of what we envisioned this panel was responding to questions or comments that you all have in your perspectives. I know we've kind of talked enough. So I'd like to turn it over to kind of, Shar has a mic. If you have a question or a comment or just whatever. Someone back there was raising their hand, Shar.
Where?
Oh, she was just waving. Oh, okay.
Thank you. For Maury Lindros and Joni, my wife from Walport, first of all, thank you guys, and women, I'm sorry. We've been waiting for this for such a long time. We need a union. We need a union in churches and synagogues and Buddhist temples to fight against this white Christian nationalism. And all of us feel the oppression, and the oppression is just really numbing at times. We've been trying to organize an open forum in Walport just on this subject. The fear, the silence is just unbelievable. And I know that you can all speak from experience, the fear in your congregation. You say too much and you're gone. And including Catholic churches. I'd like for you to speak a little bit. Is it Tim from Chicago?
Oh, well, that's Tim, Reginald. Yeah.
Well, you both talked about Palestine and Judaism and Israel. Just as an example, the silence from the churches as a result of, I think, Christian nationalism on the genocide, and of which we continue to be complicit. How do the churches, how are we going to deal with this? The churches are our hope, educating people. And that issue of the Palestinians, of the Gazians, of the West Bank that continues to torment us, collectively, we're all one. We're all together.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry for rambling, but again, thank you for raising this, raising this subject.
To answer the question regarding, how does the church respond to what is happening in Israel? I'm going to assume that we can speak from our particular lens, and we'll chop it up to grace, and conversations will follow, and we'll all know that we're working from a place of care. With that being said, different theological perspectives and frameworks position Israel as either just a character in the Bible as a part of the story, the nation of Israel that was established, the people of Israel, and let me back up. The people of Israel and the nation of Israel that exists today are two separate entities. That is a very important clarification, and I think no matter what your worldview is, that should be kind of a basis point. It is the power structures that are currently in place that would have us believe that they are not. That they are one group, that the same Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jesus' lineage, Mary's lineage, King David's lineage all leads to Benjamin Netanyahu and the other leaders and individuals who live and inhabit Israel today, which a cursory glance at history tells us that that's not the case. It is theologically advantageous for Christian nationalists to support Israel blindly, Because in their worldview and theology, in some worldviews and theology, it is their way to get Jesus to come. It is no different than, it goes back to what I shared earlier. It is a means to an end. They are actually using the Israeli people as a prop to execute the soon coming of Jesus. The relationship is it is abusive relationship at its core. We're seeing this even with how Donald Trump is responding now with the war. He's telling Benjamin Netanyahu X, Y, and Z. He's upset with Israel. You're screwing it up. You're causing problems. You're hurting us. You're making us look stupid. It's because Donald Trump is only responding to his base, Christian nationalists, and helping cultivate their personal theological endgame, which is Armageddon and what Pete Hegseth is ultimately looking forward to, a battle of tanks. And then Jesus will come. And I think any person of faith that believes in Jesus desires Jesus to come back. But we can't cause him to come. That's not how that works. And so our faithfulness to him will induce his arrival and not any American intervention. And so I think the church is silent because we get something out of war in the Middle East. Because if we go deep enough into war, maybe, just maybe, something happens to the Temple Mount and we see what we kind of fall into the stories of what Armageddon could look like, and that means Jesus comes back, and so we get out of the challenge. And it's actually escapist in nature when we look at it from the lens of, oh, we've burnt up the earth's resources. We have been bad stewards to our neighbors. And now that we have extracted the earth's resources to the point where global warming and sea levels are rising, now let's go ahead and induce Jesus to come back, because then we can escape. It's, again, using Jesus not because he is Savior and Lord, but using Jesus as an escape hatch to a better world that is to come. But ultimately, that won't even grant them access.
I have a few thoughts on that subject, but I also do want to apologize, Reginald, for booking you an Ocean View room. Because you did tell me 2 years ago, one, that if you saw a Jesus on a surfboard one more time, you would leave this country. And two, that you were deathly afraid of tsunamis. So,
Yes.
So, in my faith tradition, I will pray for you.
Thank you.
I wanted to speak to your question on the silence of the church. One thing that I have witnessed, I grew up in a generational Christian community and faith tradition. One thing I witness in my current daily profession is that we, especially white American Christians, have lived for a very long time with what I call deluxe and luxury Christianity. In other words, it can be a heritage, it can be a cultural view, it can be something that's added into our weekly schedule, but that I can do whatever I want and I don't receive any consequences for that. So therefore, to speak up for somebody else and to do it from a position of care and love means I will often lose something. It's everything we do is a trade. It's a trade of time versus money. It's a trade of energy versus rest. Everything we do is a trade. And so for, especially an American Christian, many of people who sit in the seats on a weekly basis are concerned personally. They hear about what happens. They see pictures, of leveled villages, and are deeply personally troubled and concerned. Many people turn it off and avoid it. Many others think, but what happens if I say something? What am I going to lose? And the answer is it could be a lot. For example, I routinely have to ask other people for a bit more courage. I've done other things in my life, and I can go do other things again. I would, at this point, if I, in my congregation, was perceived as overtly political, I would lose my health care. I would lose my ability to support my teenage children. I'd lose quite a lot personally. And I think, is that worth doing? And so I think the answer for me is often I've tended to be a little bit of a coward. I've tended to enjoy luxury Christianity, here and there. But so I think that's why you're going to see that silence, is to move forward, as Reginald introduced, with the highest value being love for neighbor, means in our economy, in our culture, we will lose something, absolutely. Whether it's authority, whether it's respect, whether it's an income, we will, in many cases, be cut off from other family members, be cut off from community engagement in a very short order. So I personally believe it's worth it. Inside the Christian tradition is all of the tools to understand that will happen and what to do about it. But again, to transition from a place of ease and comfort to a, possibly the rest of your life suffering materially for it is a daunting thing for so many people to do. And so, my encouragement would be, if you are in a place, if you are still in the Christian faith, or if you dialogue with people who are, routinely give them some encouragement. Another thing that we may have to do very shortly is develop mutual aid societies that take care of communities beyond the paycheck and the 401k and the healthcare benefits. That's going to be something that has been required in every anti-fascist movement in all of history. And that's a big thing to consider, but it also is a reality. And if you want allies to stand up, we may have to work with each other, because the system is not going to do it for us.
I would come from a different perspective than I think most of the panelists, because there are, the question was, why isn't the church speaking? And the church is speaking, but there are some churches that has been described, it's a real risk to speak.
You can put us in the evangelical category. That's another lecture for another.
I can only speak to the United Church of Christ, Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I know the Episcopal Church. There are numerous progressive denominations at the conference or whatever district level, the congregational level. I know, speaking as a pastor, I have complete freedom of the pulpit. My church disagrees with me frequently, but there's never, for me, a danger that, as you've described, which is true for many people serving congregations, that you could get fired for being too political, for being perceived that way. So the church is speaking. I know the United Church of Christ as a denomination on a conference level. I myself, as a pastor, have written letters, have signed off on things, have said, our church doesn't stand for this. Things related to the genocide in Gaza, things related to gun violence, things related to the treatment of our queer folk within the church and within the nation. And so I think it does, I give this just as a message of hope. Yes. That what we hear from the media is the church is in Donald Trump's pocket. And that is, I won't say the word I'd like to say because I don't want to affect it, but it's just not true. The church universal is not in Donald Trump's pocket. Many churches are struggling with that and how to handle that and how to speak truth to power that is going to be helpful. So the church universal is still in God's pocket. And so that gives me hope. And I just want to speak that positive message that there are churches and individuals in churches that are speaking truth to power. Even and sometimes, as you say, Bill, people who are much braver than I am, because they're in situations where it's like, if I say this, I could lose my job, and yet they are saying it. They're taking that risk, which I applaud them for that strength of character to do that. But I'm fortunate to be in this congregation, this denomination, and there are others that are speaking. And we've seen the newest Pope also speaking, and he's facing criticism from many, more militant Catholics that he's being too political, as was his predecessor. And so these are difficult times, and the church universal, capital C, throughout history, has stood up to authoritarianism. Many have paid the price with their very lives, or their livelihoods at the least. And so it is a time for courage for all of us to speak truth to power.
I'll wait for a question, and I'll rope it into the next question.
Okay.
Ed Armstrong. I'm privileged to be a member of this church. It's in my wife and I's travels. We've owned several houses along the coast, and we've attended different churches, and I've watched different pastors' styles, if you would, how they reach out and talk or not talk. And I think one of the missing elements, and not so much in this church, since I'm here, don't want to, downplay Mike, but I think one of the things as pastors that you could do is, it's one thing to hear the pastor talk about the love of Christ and things like that. It's a total other thing to teach the congregation how to speak to your neighbors. And in my communities that I've lived, I've always been blessed to have a conservative person that I could have this interesting conversation across. And what I've learned is not to confront when my Reedsport neighbor said, well, there's a mass of 1 million immigrants coming across from Mexico. I would use my own personal stories about being an educator. And I was always happy to have Hispanic families because they really cared about their families. And so you can have these conversations, not that maybe you're going to change them totally, but I really believe if pastors would teach us not to be silent, because it's one thing to have a group where you're together and all believing the same thing in a place, but when you're on your own, out there with a neighbor, that's what I remember. My neighbor here in Lincoln City that just recently moved, one of his friends came down, and his first question was, what do you believe? And he was asking me whether I was a Republican or a Democrat. I mean, that was what he was asking. And so my response, which I'll credit Mike for, was, well, I love everyone, so it really doesn't matter about the politic. It matters about what's in a person's heart. And the guy, he was dumbstruck. So it's not to confront and to say, oh, I don't believe in that. That's not a good way to start a conversation. Are you a Republican or a Democrat? I mean, what's your heart say? What are your stories? And I think pastors can help us by helping us tell what, rather than confrontation and saying, well, here's my sign. Not that I don't think you shouldn't have a sign, but it's what is a story that I can share that might make me more human or them more human to me. So I think there's a duty that pastors have to teach us so that we can go out and have conversations with people that we may disagree with.
I'd like to say something to that. Part of the reason why I joined a fire department was to try to teach my congregation how to reach into a community. Not for religious purposes, just to be a community member. Because when a 911 calls, it doesn't matter what flag is flying outside of your house. One night we had a particular call and there were flags everywhere. One of my firefighters said to me, well, I bet you love being here, Tim. And I said, yes, I do. Only because there was a need and we could address that need. I grew up with my grandparents taking me to Salvation Army Church, which did show me to respect everybody who walked in the door. And it was something that was impressed on me from a very young age. So I did try very hard to make the connection that you just said. It's not enough to just shoot your mouth off. You've got to be able to reach across that fence, even if you deeply disagree. Now, there are times when we do hold stances. There are some things that are just flat wrong in how you treat people. I just recently had somebody, and I don't want to say exactly where yet. If you read your brochure, you can see what I'm taking care of now. He calls himself a West Coast Jew. He grew up in Portland, just got his driver's license at 35 because he was a bicycle rider. Him and I have had some tremendously interesting conversations. But he came and said, would you be part of an underground railroad if we need it? It broke my heart. Just to think, I live in a country that question is even asked. Would you hide people if you need to? I wanted to tell you that I said yes. And I know enough people in my congregation that would say yes. So I think we can, and we do. It's like I said, I lost my job. No, I was not fired, so they can always let that know. I got moved. I'm the one that went to Hockinson Heights in the middle of apostolic, Reformation. What's happening in Battleground. That is what this is part of. I think they put me there to break me. But after a month, 2 months being there, that church asked, would you come and be our pastor? Because I preached the same thing to them that I did to the group that I was here. I think part of it is that we have so strayed from what it even means that when you do share with people, it opens up their eyes. So I think, again, part of it is a grace that we give to each other. There's times where I'm going to have to say, I can't go there. I just can't go there. And so I do believe that what you said is extremely important, is to teach everyone how to do this. How do we become part of a community and truly care? I want to say one thing because I'm afraid that it's going to be gone before too long, but this is the most gorgeous pulpit I have ever seen.
Yes.
I sat over there thinking,
Paul, raise your hand.
oh,
Not
okay,
Paul, not Paul, but his sister made that. Anything in our church made of wood, his sister made it.
Well, I do believe that you should not steal, but and you should not covet. But I just think this is the single most beautiful pulpit I have ever seen. And I just wanted to say that.
Conversation. If you hold to the Christian identity, even if you don't, but most particularly if you do, then you're always looking for that common ground. You're always looking for the common humanity. And I just got a book, I don't know, yesterday or the other 2 days ago, called The Psychology of Christian Nationalism and How to Talk to Somebody, or doing something to Leviathan, taking down Leviathan, and how to talk to somebody. And I haven't cracked those books open yet, but from personal experience, even when somebody is blistering hot on the subject, what I've discovered, and I believe I have said this to my congregation, is when you spot that other person's humanity and you see them as a child of God, as you are, and you carry in your heart the belief that they have intrinsic value beyond anything else on this planet. Every human being has intrinsic value. And you believe that when you go into the conversation, like you found your common ground. You told us personal story, and it's Ed, right? Yeah, and I believe that that's really probably the very best and first step, especially as a Christian, because if you are as combative, everybody turns off all of their radar, down goes the scopes, and the conversation is over. And the minute you get hot under the collar, you may never have that opportunity again with that person. So seeing that person's intrinsic value to God and believing that your heart can open, literally, to somebody who doesn't look like you, believe like you, act like you, sing like you, have absolutely, you think you may have nothing in common. At least you've probably got children in common, or you have parents in common. And finding that commonality is the only way we're gonna win this war, is seeing the value. Not that human beings are pawns in a political chess game, but that we find and see and believe that the beauty and the value of other individuals just by virtue of the fact that they are human.
Beloved children of God. Yeah, everyone is a beloved child of God.
Yes, even the red hat people, so that's, yes. I think you want to add something.
I do want to add something to that. This is, God had to convict me on this. The Christian journey is so dynamic, especially if my friends who may not be a part of a Christian denomination or faith. True Christianity should drive you to love your enemies so radically that I had to realize, God had to convict me. Would God still be sovereign if my next door neighbor in heaven was Donald Trump or Jeffrey Epstein? Would God be sovereign if he could save Hitler? And if I can't accept God's wisdom and judgment and his ability to redeem every person despite their evil, either I have created a small God, or there's still things yet for me to learn. And it is so scary and frustrating that there is a possibility, just like what we talked about with Jonah, or we heard about Jonah, right? God, I knew you were a righteous and kind God, and you forgive. When we are loving our neighbor, we have the neighbor isn't just the person who lives next door; it's every single one of us. And so, because we are all image bearers, because we all are beloved child of God, that means he loves them enough to save them and redeem them. And we may not, the greatest conflict would be, what would it be like for us to encounter someone who we absolutely despise? And that's why we have to work that out today. And I can speak from personal experience. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I'll also be the one to confess it. In my first election that I voted in, I struggled to determine if I was going to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And I made the right choice. I'll say that. I made the right choice. But I had to unpack what about Donald Trump spoke to me. Well, I was a young guy in college, and I went to one of our institutions, and I realized that I had been socially pivoted off what I knew to be right because of the effect I bought into some of those lies. So if that was for me, what I experienced, and I got as a kid who was influenced by Jesse Jackson and countless other black leaders, how did I get knocked off of my moorings? It's creeping compromise. It's oh, they became my enemies. People were in the socialization of who I was around helped morph my ideas. And so I became a victimizer because I was a victim of indoctrination. And so to see the humanity of each person means I can see that Donald Trump is being played by the churches that are backing him up and the pastors who are using him as clout. And so I have to have a measure of empathy to a person that many doctors are saying may have frontal temporal dementia. And as they're using him, he may not have a clue all the time that he's being used. And that means I have to have compassion. And I know it sounds crazy to have compassion for this abuser, this evil, this felon who's brutalized women and has terrible things to say about all communities. But as a beloved child of God who sees the beloved child of Godness in others, I have to see that Donald Trump is also that the other people, we can list all the names, and that then puts you on a different pedestal. Not one to be higher up than your neighbor, but that puts you in a different moral footing. That I'm going to be the bigger person that loves people radically. And that, I think, is the biggest piece that we miss in our discourse.
So I have a MAGA friend, and what I'm understanding is that she and her Bible study group, they truly believe that Donald Trump is ordained by God to do, I don't know, whatever is going to be happening. But what would be the best way of, handling that or discussing that with her? I'm never quite sure how to respond.
Pamela White said, saying no to Trump is like saying no to God. And so some of us who understand idolatry might bring that up in a way, but I wonder if you guys have a good answer to that.
I think one of the things I hear people say that is because they couch it in terms, they often, not always, and I don't know the specific situation, but they often couch it in terms of ultimately God is in control. And so Donald Trump's a terrible person and he's done bad things, but King David was a bad person and he did bad things, and God used him. So God is in control and God uses everybody. And so then I often respond, oh, so you believe that God ordained for Obama to be president for 8 years, and you believe God ordained Biden to be president for, no, those people are servants of evil. And so I think, sometimes you have to take their arguments and turn them back to them. That's not saying it will work, but maybe sometimes it makes them think, I kind of have to rethink some of this stuff.
Jesus never responded directly to a question. He was very good at attending to it. He gets to the emotions behind it. So when your friend asks you about Trump in your perspective, or you're in a conversation, I would offer this strategy. And I found that it works for my MAGA friends. Oh, what does that mean for you? So if she's asked, the question was, do you believe that Donald Trump was ordained by God, or how to respond to that? Well, what is it like to have Donald Trump be ordained by God for you? And allowing that person to talk about how Donald Trump makes them feel. And listen for the emotions. Because the reality is, when we talk to our friends who may have different political values, sometimes we're actually hearing the fear of immigration that is unchecked and unbalanced is a fear of loss of control. And I would invite, the chaplain in me would say, well, let's see what other areas of that person's life is unregulated and out of control. And so they're putting all of their emotional eggs in the immigration basket, because it's a lot easier to be anti-immigration than to be anti the dysregulation that is at home that needs to be addressed. And ultimately, if unprovoked, that person is asking, they're actually seeking your validation, which means there may be some insecurity and some inconsistencies. And so if you are interested in truly addressing the person, the image bearer of God, and the potential Christian nationalist, and wanting to win them over, winning their confidence is a huge step in the direction. I had friends who voted for Donald Trump in the previous in 2020, but did not vote for him, and did not vote in 2024, because I spent more time hearing and tending to their needs versus trying to win them over in a political debate. And so I think that's a very important option for you to be able to say, oh, are you asking for my validation on your political choice? Or are you just, what does this mean? Why are you asking me this question? because there may be more to their interpersonal dynamic. And if you show them a kindness, you may actually be able to, oh, wait, you're struggling to keep food on the table. Well, let me go ahead and connect you with resources in this local community that can help you, without judgment and without I told you so. Because what will hopefully happen is they will come back and be like, I can't believe I've allowed Donald Trump and this policy to make me spite my nose. What's the saying? Cut nose to spite my face. Yeah, and so I think that may be an option. It may not work, but maybe it does, and it's worth a shot.
I want to it's popped into my head what I would say to this person. How well do you like to make sandwiches? Or ask her if she appreciates her voting rights, because that's in Project 2025 to repeal the 19th Amendment. So it might be a moment to wake her up just a little bit. Do you value being able to vote for the next president? Because the agenda is to remove that right. And that's tantamount to our democracy. How do you feel about democracy? How do you feel about the patriarchy? Do you want your daughter to be able to have rights over her own physical body and receive health care? These are right now concerns, and they're on the table. It's not even a far off maybe or maybe not. This is the goal, and already Project 2025 is right on course.
80%.
So that would be what I would ask her. Any additions?
And echoing really validating what both of them have said, I think, Val, I would recommend any snarkiness. In my personal experience, you need a relationship for that to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
If this is a cold contact, the chaplaincy approach is the only possible way. Otherwise, it just becomes a pair of arguments that nobody seeks to resolve. I ask myself a personal question each time I'm about ready to have a political point of, am I willing to learn something when we're done with this conversation, or am I just waiting to tell you what I believe? And that causes me to delete most of the things I ever typed on Facebook. And I have deleted more than I've ever posted. And so I ask myself that question every time, because I struggle with not wanting to argue with people. And so, but another kind of, let's see, where was I going to go with that one when I was listening to you two? The other piece I would say, and this makes some of us tired, but when you are working to hold back a dangerous tide, when you're working to kind of oppose a very powerful force that's coming, it really does require 10 times more education than the other side gets to enjoy. It requires 10 times more compassion. It requires understanding where you're going with all of this at a much higher level. Individuals who are easily prey for authoritarian regimes have chosen, or maybe not even chosen, they have given up control over making most of the decisions in their lives. Probably because of fatigue, because of other social factors, because of pressure, because of feeling confused all the time. To believe in something that looks to many of us so ridiculous, you've already given control a long time ago. And so having a differing view shouted at you will only cause that to be locked in even tighter, because it produces a fear reaction. And so that person will then avoid that relationship and turn towards the person. And if they're a Christian nationalist, it'll likely be their pastor. Or what I like to call the buffet church, which is anybody online this moment who tells me a piece of what I want to hear. They will then go find that validation, but only positively, never negatively, never to check their own facts. And so again, my encouragement for each one of us, and that was mentioned in Tim's address, is read books. Read a lot of them. Be consistent, understand it. Read, there's a debate technique, if you ever were in high school debate, that gives you the impetus or the requirement to go and attempt to argue their point of view for them before you ever engage them. And that's a really frustrating thing to do, is to say, if I was them, why would I care about this? Why would I be willing to, have fractured relationships over this? And, do that work and then say, okay, I'm starting to understand where they're coming from now. But where am I coming from? And so, because many of us want the same thing. We want security, we want end of confusion, we want, clarity. We're often fighting for the same basic needs.
Can you speak about the intersection of due process and justice in relationship to theology?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
What are delegates speak?
It's a softball. It's a softball.
So,
Due process in relation to theology.
Injustice. Wow, that was like a massage to every part of my brain. I enjoyed that question being even delivered because it tickled all my favorite spots. So, when it comes to due process and justice as it pertains to theology, we often think justice from a theological lens or the day of God's judgment as just a theological event or a moment in time. But there's actually a massive theological underpinning of justice, that God will make things right.
Yes.
And so because we live in a world that is broken, that has serious dynamic issues when it comes to injustice, we have to realize that when we are seeking justice in our communities, we are not necessarily seeking heavenly or divine justice. Because divine justice holds me accountable regardless of my political ideations. Whether or not a jury of my peers finds me innocent or guilty. And so when it comes to the measures of due process, I would love to kind of get a better understanding of you. Are you asking as it pertains to our ongoing violation of the due processes of our immigrant brothers and sisters?
I am.
Okay, so if we're talking specifically around the conversation about the due process of our immigrant brothers and sisters, my church has actually the only Seventh-day Adventist church to send a letter to Donald Trump demanding him to treat immigrants with compassion and due process and justice. And one of the things that we presented in our letter to his administration was that the Bible demands to treat the immigrant like a native son or daughter. And so it implies that the processes afforded to a citizen should be extended to every single person who is within your borders. When we see the Sabbath command given in Exodus, it is not just a command for the people who are following in the covenant relationship with Yahweh. It is you are now extending Yahweh's relationship by way of your labor expectations to all peoples that are within, even to your animals and to your land.
Yes.
And so, as it pertains to due process and justice with God, He is very intentional about the processes. Almost every single theological, traditional, or even I would say traditional theological framework sees a justice system at play. That right and wrong are adjudicated, and ultimately God's wisdom, which oftentimes is not our own, will prevail, but have you and I at the center with a positive outcome. We may not see it as a positive outcome in this life, but one that can be obtained through holistic living and obedience to the worldview that we are subscribing to. And so one of the elements that I am seeing that is important for my faith tradition, and other faith traditions that when it comes to the matter of conversation around justice, is we must not attempt to use theology and our position to bring justice forward. We are only to uphold biblical standards of justice, which is treating people fairly, which is giving them what is promised to them, doing what is right. Because when we see Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he addresses injustice even further and the inability of due process when it comes to the matters of divorce, when it matters to business, with oath keeping. And so the Sermon on the Mount is actually a conversation that Jesus is critiquing culture and the injustice of the society that he is living in, and inviting people to walk into a more aligned perspective around justice and to benefit other before benefiting self. I hope that answered your question.
And what came to mind when I was listening to your question, because it didn't massage my brain, because I'm not that smart, but what always I find is that when we think about God's judgment, first thing we do, and we heard it from Pete Hegstad, when we went into Iran, he wants Armageddon. He wants to start it, he wants to push it, but the problem is, most people, when we hear words like apocalypse, we hear words like Armageddon, we're thinking God's judgment has come. But the funny thing is, the word apocalypse is a Greek word, just means revelation, to be seen, to show. I come from a tradition that says the only thing the book of Revelation shows is the love of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And yet we have created helicopters and grasshoppers and all kinds of end time scenario nonsense. But we have to go back to realize that the word Armageddon is not even there's no place. It's Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. There's an event that took place at Megiddo where people had to make a decision to follow God or not follow him. It is a personal thing, an individual thing. So when I look at the end time scenario, I'm not looking for the world to collapse. And I'm not concerned about tsunamis. Just run faster than the wave. That's the only thing there. It's just not a big thing.
I'm not that fast.
So I was on the fire department there in Netart's Oceanside, and most of that's going to go down and go under. And, we just said, just stand and watch it, enjoy.
It's all over anyway, right?
When it's all done, if you're still alive, then help somebody. That was the big deal. But part of what it is that we still go back to this concept that we really think that when God's justice falls, he's going to crack the head of everybody that disagreed with him. I just don't think that is very biblical. The book of Romans, chapter 1, says what he will do is he's going to let you do what you want to do. And some things will kill you. I sat with my grandfather at the end of his life. He had a cigarette in one hand and his oxygen mask in the other. And we sat in the garage together. He had been a diesel mechanic. I learned more cuss words from him than anyone I ever knew. He was kind of a vile person. But at the end of his life, he said, Tim, what do I need to do to be saved? Shocked the life out of me. And he said, I had created this image that I couldn't get out of. I was a tough guy. I was a mechanic. But he was sitting there with that cigarette, and I knew he died of emphysema. It was a choice. Whether he made it, he didn't make it, I don't know. Everybody at that particular era did it. But we were talking about the fact that you can accept Christ and change your outcome at any time in your life. And he says, well, isn't God going to judge me for smoking? Look what I got. And I said, no. You got the natural result of what you were doing. It's not because of God's judgment. It's not because God hates you. It's because your lungs are not meant to be filled with smoke for 60, 70, 80 years. But I said the problem is that what God has said to us that we don't want to hear is, it goes back to the Jonah thing. Jonah wanted the Ninevites to pay for their wickedness. And God said, but I'm not that kind of God. If you turn, we stop this. Now you may receive results. I know that if I speed and I lose control of a car, I'm going to pay the price for that. But it's not God's judgment. It's my, number one, lack of skill or lack of judgment. And so part of what I do, and we talk about due process, again, I think we have to, and I like what you said, Reggie, divorce theology from that when it comes to a political stance. But when we're looking at God, he constantly tells us in the Old Testament to Abraham, to Moses, I am a God of mercy. It's my first name, and I can't help it. You want to stop? I'll let you. You want to start loving? I'll let you. So one of the messages I used to preach to my church in Tillamook for 13 years then is get out of God's way and let him just be nice to you. Because we are wanting to be punished. We want to pay the price. God doesn't do it that way.
Reggie, I've lived on the Oregon coast for 34 years. And when I lived a block from the ocean, I never slept a night through, terrified of that tsunami. It doesn't go away. I mean, I'm just telling you, it doesn't go away.
I've just accepted that it is what it is now. Thank you.
I just have to chime in with these guys. We're all a similar theological worldview. I love what they've said, particularly about God's character. I concur 200%. And before I don't get the chance to, it is an honor to sit up here with these guys who really exemplify the Christian spirit, because that's what we're supposed to do right now here. We're talking about Christianity as opposed to something that's trying to hijack what we believe. And what we believe is in a good God, and we believe in the beauty of humanity regardless of color, race, creed, religious belief. These are intrinsic to who we are, and I've been so thrilled just to be able to be on this panel with you guys. It's a real fist bump moment. Thank you.
And last little piece on the due process question. We have a lot of talk about being a Christian nation. This comes from a minority of the people who live in this nation. We're experiencing minority rule right now. And we're experiencing this, and one of the tools of this type of thing is to make decisions so fast that you overwhelm due process. And one thing I really lean into is we have a very unique privilege in a small window of time where, really small, as in 4 decades, where most, not all, most humans in this country have a right to change their politics. It's been less than 4 decades that this has existed anywhere on the face of the earth, in this large of a group of people. Very new, and it is very challenged. And so, one of the things I think is probably wise for each of us to remember is, for those of us who are Christian, especially up here, we're professional Christians. We're like full-time, like elite Christians. And so, yes, some of us are intern Christians currently. And so those, so our theology influences, for example, my politics. But we have been given a gift of this thing called due process. I do not want my theology to write that due process, because I want it for people who I disagree with. And so that, again, is going to mean that we actually have practical, pragmatic, on the streets, neighbor-to-neighbor work to explain why sometimes the right thing takes a lot of time. Because, one thing you see is haste. I want, he mentioned it, I want somebody who did wrong to be punished now. I want a haste. I don't want it to take time. We hear it all the time out here. We don't have enough DAs. That's a big constant political fight locally. We don't have enough of this. The courts do X. that's the biggest fight, is how quickly does somebody get punished for what they did to me? And so, as a citizen with a very short window of time to be able to change these things, I think we have a big burden to demonstrate why this has value. But I think it wouldn't have value if it wasn't being pushed against so aggressively.
That's right.
And so quickly. Sometimes that projection tells you more than, the security of it. And Shar, how much, we've taken a lot of time here.
I have no watch.
She has no watch. Do we have any more questions out there?
It's 10 after 8, Char.
Okay. So, how are you guys doing? Having a good time?
We have plenty of time. I want to respect everybody else's time. But any other questions out?
Do you have other questions?
And I'm happy to answer I'm speaking only for myself. I think it's super important that if you have a question, there's no stupid questions. There's no ignorant question. There is no bad question. Especially in these panels, one of the things that I think happens is you may have a burning question and you don't know how to frame it. Go ahead and just frame it the best way you can. Even if it doesn't have a frame, just give us how you have it, because what you may get an answer to could very well be the difference in your life, but also in the life of maybe a vulnerable person that does not have your privilege. And you could seriously make a massive difference in their life by asking a half-formulated question and allow us to kind of bring new light to that question. So I just want to, especially to those people who may, and I don't know if we have a system for people who write a question, they may not feel comfortable speaking into a mic. Or my wife is sitting right there. If you whispered in her ear, she'll happily answer for you.
I'm going to suggest that we kind of end this formally, but I don't think any of these panelists are, the Mariners game is over, so I'm not going anywhere. But I don't think any of these panelists are in any rush to get out. So if you resonated with one individual panelist, or if you just want to come up here and chit-chat or take someone aside or chat amongst yourselves, make yourselves at home. But I think we can maybe end here, because maybe some people do need to go, but nobody's in a rush to leave.
Well, I think that's a good idea. And I also want to say, for those of you who don't know him, if he did not watch a Mariners game to be here, that was a terrific sacrifice. And
There's some real sacrifice going on here tonight.
Recording it? Of course.
yes, it's been recorded, and it'll be on YouTube, both for the church channel and for Indivisible Lincoln City. Oh, the Mariners.
No one tell them the score.
Why would I think of that?
I do want to put out one local plug as well. There are a lot of books out there that have been demoed. A lot of reading to do, a lot of recommendations, good recommendations. Please, if at all possible, go down to Bob's Speech Books, order them there, even if you need to wait a week or so. Keep our money local, support local businesses who have been in this community for a very long time, who are invested in it, care about it. My personal recommendation is avoid the temptation to get those things tomorrow via airmail. So please support local businesses if you can. Yes, sir.
Can I make a plug?
Absolutely.
As we're wrapping up. So if you're ever in the Portland metro area, feel free to reach out. The justice work that is going forth out there, I would say we solicit your prayers as much as we pray for you all out here. I am watching a large transformation of people who have been disillusioned, not coming back to faith, but coming back to partner with faith groups to make a difference. And to make a difference in the community and to help revitalize communities of faith. Not in a sense of like church growth. I absolutely can't stand church growth. But the work of caring for our neighbor doesn't need a method, and it doesn't need a science. It just needs us to show up love your neighbor. And one other thing that's very important, I see that I may be one of 2 black folk in the room. And so I want to say, look at your black brothers and sisters in their local faith groups, in your respective denomination, or even if you don't have a denomination that you're part of, look at what they're doing and what they're saying and do your best to mirror. Not the cultural experience, but I have observed in living 10 years as a studier of my white brothers and sisters. One thing I have noticed, it's fine, Apple will take care of it. One thing I've noticed is that the black church usually is a canary in the coal mine. So use that resource. I'm okay with it. Juneteenth is almost here. Black people have been used for generations, so I'll just say it. Leverage what we warn about early. Because we're warning about things that are about 10 years from affecting you. And so if you're willing to accept wisdom and prophetic voice early, listen to black clergy. If they're warning, they're usually warning ahead of time. If black leaders are warning, they're usually warning that something will come to your doorsteps. And I think that is something that I wish I would have said earlier in my life. I've known about it for years, but it's just to my brothers and sisters who are not black, listen. And the same way I study your communities, have a cultural exchange. Don't be afraid to interact. I think one of the biggest things that happen is we're afraid to interact and touch and agree. And I think it'd be remiss if we're talking about this. The black church has always been a bastion of support for people. And so if you need some extra resources, just like the books, but if you need some good sermons on justice topics, go ahead and look up a black preacher as well. It gives you a different lens, and it may bring some things in a different perspective. And it may make a serious difference in your well-being.
And I want to add to that, I think that was a beautiful statement. My life was changed with a newspaper at 10 o'clock in the morning. I got a paper, I got a cup of coffee, and I went to my office. I was in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Opened up the page, and there was an article on Elizabeth Urani, Holocaust survivor, Auschwitz, Birkenau. And I don't know what it was, but somehow there was enough identification that I realized her house was right behind my church. We shared a fence. I put the paper down and I walked around the block, knocked on her door, and she changed my life. For 3 years, we held a conversation. 4 of her sisters were killed on the day she arrived in Birkenau. One of them survived until 2 hours before liberation. She just couldn't. So they got pushed out of the camp, and she was shot and killed just before the Russians liberated. What Elizabeth, and I talked to her quite a bit, is, did you lose faith in people? And she said, no, but there always will be bad people. But the problem that she had is when there was no one who stood up and said she even existed. She said, my neighbors who knew me, who we grew up with, just stood there. And by walking across and knocking on her door, it taught me something to do what Reggie just said, is listen. Find those people who can teach you. Find those people who have an experience that's nothing like yours. Something that Bill said. I know I have been a very privileged white person. I've had a privileged job. I just read it this week. To be a white preacher in America, to get paid to sit and read my Bible when everybody else has to go to work. I didn't really see it that way because it was a lot of work, but it has been a privilege. And so take the time to learn, take the time to talk. I remember one day I sat down next to a homeless couple in Tillamook outside the library. I had caused them a little bit of trouble. They didn't know I was the one that did it. But we were trying to make it right, and I sat down and I just said, tell me about who you are. We talked for about an hour. I got up to leave, and she started bawling. And I turned around and said, are you okay? And she said, no one talks to us. No one talks. And it's one of the things I appreciate what you said. Start listening, start asking, start befriending. I think it does make a difference. And it makes a difference because I shared with somebody, a friend of mine, young Korean guy, he's visiting us right now from Maryland, picked him up Tuesday night. at the airport, him and his wife. And we were talking about their experience in America today. And one of the things that caught me was that he said, I am always an outsider. And I'm glad that you brought me in.
Amen.
So find those ways to connect to the best of your ability. And when you're afraid, ask. Ask.
Parting thought from Michelle Obama. Did anybody else watch the... Yes, today? Can I borrow what she said? One little statement from her address today. What a woman. She said, no one has the right to judge who is American enough. And she then followed that up with, hope is a choice. And being a decent human being is a choice.
Yes.
So as we stand up against this thing that's looming large, just remember that our identity is not based on our country necessarily. It is partly, but it is based on the fact that we are valuable just by virtue of the fact that we are here. And that our hope going forward is, I was going to say, I heard one commentator say that the number of Christians today that are Christian nationalists, it's a narrow band of Christianity. And I liked, because that, thank you, Michelle, gave me a little bit of hope. And so now I'm going to choose to hope that all the quiet little voices are going to come together. And you're right, Bill. It's in this unity that we find strength, but it's also in this unity that we discover who we are.
Yes.
Right?
Do you want to end it, Mike?
What they said. Just go and be the best person that you can be, and love everybody.
And I'm going to need help carrying this pulpit up.
As everybody walks out, I would be remiss to omit Reverend Katie Hudak from St. James Santiago Episcopal, who is on vacation, who wanted to be here. And there are quite a few allies in this community, and start asking who they are. So I do really appreciate my relationship I've been able to forge with her, with Mike, people who are inspirational for the church.
Oh, gosh.
I asked you for it.
Good work.
Hi.
And my answer might be, but I would have said it with a
You know what? It's helping break past the barrier. I'm working with community. Once I enter the scenario, I'm already there.
The tables can be left exactly where they are. Oh, absolutely. And on Sunday, my choir is playing. We need those tables right where they are. Sheriffs? No. Right, it's just three, right. And out there, you can leave those tables.
We'd love to add you to the girls.
Absolutely. No.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here. It's good. Yeah, very much so.
It has. This is good.
You gotta do it again. This is wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Well, I mean, it makes sense. Well, it makes sense. It's Oregon. Like where we I think we're 2.4% of the population. So
And there were times until very recently you were told you couldn't even come and
come out
stay.
here, yeah, I couldn't even stay the night. So
Come and visit, but please don't stay.
yeah, that is the history. So at this point, I'm like, and you know, Oregon's only confirmed lynching was on the Oregon Coast. So I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Well,
But thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. Thank you so much. How are you doing today?
Nice to meet you, Norm.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, exactly, right? Everyone's so small lately. We gotta get more milk in our diet or whatever.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Blessings.
Thank you for your perspectives. And so we still
We abused Zoom. Yes. This is what I know. That's why Bill can't see.
That's why for so long,
Do something. I consider myself my church they are and so
And part of the reason for that is like they're not our and it looks and says for our existence.
You can cherry pick and not this into
How much we
cultural and
tolerate
historical context, and that's generally.
So I don't see it as and so in our case, the majority of the cash there's not a lot of cash in my church, that's why I agree. So
Those concepts aren't teachers. Is it in the
if you just want to hit that, try to go find some dinner.
You hungry, love?
On your own.
You hungry?
What do you guys like? So I am mostly pretty vegetarian.
that a woman reaching this magical
You got
I'm 99% vegetarian. My wife is very vegetarian. So she went to go pick my kids up in front of several texts. They were at my daughter's in varsity soccer this year. So they were watching the World Cup tonight, coach. So on Tuesday, they were playing extra hard. She could barely walk to the game. So I'm doing this tonight because we're watching the World Cup on Thursday. That's awesome. So about this hour in this town, it's either a couple different varieties of Mexican. I reckon quarter by hour. Chinese if there's fries for so quarter by hour, check their hours. So Lincoln City gets really weird because tourism. So some restaurants shut down early.
Yep. Yeah, you guys let us know.
Six or seven videos that are just saying.
Civics.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that he's just,
I will say, it is absolutely beautiful out here. I see why people live here.
Maybe just civics here.
Thank you. You've offered that before, Ron, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, just a minute.
Yeah.
So whatever it has.
It's still recording. Yeah.